Hello, and welcome to the Times Journeys webinar, Women and Women's Rights in Cuba. My name is Desiree Littman, and I'm the Program and Marketing Assistant here at Times Journeys. During this webinar, we'll hear about this fascinating itinerary that focuses on gender equality in Cuba. You'll hear from Luisita Lopez Torregrosa, a former New York Times editor and the expert on our 2016 tour. Before we start, why travel with the New York Times? First of all, each of our departures is accompanied by a Times journalist or subject matter specialist. Choose from our program of over 55 itineraries, including land-based trips and specialty cruises to destinations that tell a story. Lastly, our tours offer opportunities to escape the crowds and get an authentic experience. To give you an overview of the itinerary, this is an 8-day, 7-night tour that starts with your arrival in Miami, Florida, where you'll enjoy a thought-provoking panel discussion on vital issues facing Cuba today. On day 2, fly with your group to Havana. You'll stay in Havana for the duration of the tour, taking in the historic city and meeting locals. The tour includes all of your accommodations, your tour manager and local guides, and most of your meals. On this tour, you'll interact with female entrepreneurs who have their own small businesses. You'll learn how the Federation of Cuban Women is promoting gender equality in Cuba. You'll also get the chance to discuss women in politics in Cuba with the head of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples. Learn about women in sports from female athletes and coaches, and get insight into the effects of the revolution on women in Cuba. Luisita Lopez Torregrosa is the expert on our 2016 tour. She is a journalist and former New York Times editor and has reported from all over the world, including Havana. She is currently a member of the Faculty of Communications and Media Studies at Fordham University. We'll now hear a recording of a conversation we recently had with her about her background and experience in Cuba, both personal and professional, and learn about her insights into women in Cuba. Luisita Lopez Torregrosa is the expert on our 2016 tour. She is a journalist and former New York Times editor and has reported from all over the world, including Havana. She is currently a member of the Faculty of Communication and Media Studies at Fordham University. We'll now hear a recording of a conversation we had with her about her background and experience in Cuba, both personal and professional, and learn about her insights into women in Cuba.
Really nice to be here with you. I am a long-time journalist with an intense interest in Cuba, long time. I also was born in a nearby island in Puerto Rico, so from childhood I was very aware of Cuba, very aware of the revolution and of its aftermath. And as a journalist, I've been in the United States as a journalist. I was in the United States since I was 14 years old, going to boarding school here, and then my career college, and then my career in journalism up and down the East Coast, culminating at the New York Times. I last visited Havana this past December on a Cuba tour for the New York Times Journeys. And before that, I wrote about it in 2005 for the New York Times. And at that time, it was interesting looking back because at that time, Cuba government officials, fairly high level, were already paving the ground for what has turned out to be the easing of travel restrictions on Americans, because the number one goal that the Cuban government, specifically the tourism agencies there, wanted was to get back the American tourists. And now when you go to Havana, as I did in December, you see particularly all Havana, but all of Havana, full of tourists, many, of course, from other countries. But what was amazing to me is that in the space of 10 years, I went from being one of the few Americans in Havana visiting. Of course, I was there as a journalist, not as a tourist. And now, the town is full of Americans. So, with this background and covering politics and personalities all over the world, this particularly in the Americas, but also in the Southeast Asia, I am fascinated with what's happening in Cuba and feel very close to it, in fact.
Do you want to discuss a little bit about why you decided to join this tour as an expert? What are you most excited about, and what elements of the tour really interest you?
I'm very excited about just going back to Havana and to look at it in a deeper way. As you know, most tours are fairly superficial. This tour and the tour that I went to also with New York Times Journeys in December as an expert are fairly in depth, and all of the travelers see things and experience people and places that a lot of the tourists who go there do not. So it gives all of us a close up of Havana and the rest of Cuba, or other parts of Cuba today. I'm very excited about, particularly talking with the women in politics and in the arts and in literature, and also the surge of women entrepreneurs in Cuba. One of the things that I didn't say before is that most of my writing in the past 10 years, 5 years or so, has been on women issues, both in the United States and outside the United States. And Cuba has made incredible, or actually very large progress on that score. It is ahead of many, many other countries in the world. Actually, it's on the top 20 in advances for women. And this tour will give travelers, the people who go on this tour, will give them a really intense and very exciting look at what women are doing now in Cuba.
So are there any highlights of this tour that really stand out to you, that you think are going to be a really incredible experience? Any elements of the itinerary that really jumped out when you read it?
Yes, for sure. Well, let's start by just the arrival. If you haven't been to Havana before, just the arrival there is very exciting and very, very thrilling and memorable. But specifically to the tour that we're going on, I am really looking forward to the discussion with the Federation of Cuban Women, who have been fighting to promote gender equality in all spheres of Cuban society. I am also very looking forward to talking with the women at the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People, because they will discuss women in politics in Cuba. Cuba has a very high index of women in politics, much higher, by the way, in percentage than the United States. However, it's important to understand how the political system works there, which is not, obviously, as we know, the same way that it works here. Also, these women in politics, and there's includes conversations with them will include something very important, which is Cuba's position on female reproductive rights. As you probably know, Cuba is the only country in all of Latin America that where abortion is legal, and therefore is depending on your point of view, it's one of the things that it has that women have accomplished there. I'm also one of the things that two things that I really can't wait to be involved in and to listen to, that we're going to be meeting with the National Union of Writers and Artists of Cuba. We meet with female Cuban filmmakers and Cuban poets and Cuban writers. And also they will talk a lot about the Afro-Cuban experience, which is very, very important in Cuba. And, one of the things that we've been hearing about a lot lately with the with the somewhat loosening of restrictions on the economy in Cuba and the increase in private enterprise, we're going to be talking to a group of women lawyers or jurists to learn about the rights of women in the workplace, also the rights of women in divorces, which had been fairly restrictive against women in the past in parts of Latin America. We also will be talking about the effect of the revolution in Cuba. Cuban women played a very big role during the revolution. I'm talking about the Castro Revolution, and I will be talking about that as one of my talks, the lectures that I will be giving during the trip. And finally, one thing that it's very exciting and very advanced in Cuba is the National Center of Sexual Education, known as CENESEX, which is directed by Mariela Castro, who's a very charismatic, powerful figure in Cuba, not only because she is the daughter of President Raúl Castro, but mainly because of the incredible role, very major role she has played in advancing the cause and the rights of gay people in Cuba, of the LGBT movement in Cuba, which also is, although it does not allow same-sex marriages or unions, it still is farther ahead than in most of Latin America. And finally, we'll be talking to a collective of female artists. And the Cuban art is renowned in the world. It's not, kind of an artifact, and it's not a kind of picturesque kind of minor activity in Cuba. Cuban art, I'm talking about the visual arts, painting, and so on, is renowned, in the United States and in the world. And we'll be talking to a collective that's only women, and how do they manage, how do they stand out, because still Cuba, after all is said and done, it is a patriarchal and male-oriented society. And these are the things that I'm excited about, but there is so much more, because what makes these trips, particularly this New York Times journey, so important and so memorable, that is the unexpected. When you run into someone or a place that is unexpectedly interesting, intriguing, and there is always room for that, and there's always room to have quite a bit of fun. Havana now has much better restaurants. The food is much better. The hotels are very nice, and so all of that adds to the allure of going there. But mostly it's educational, and it's educational, but education in a very exciting way, that we'll be seeing and hearing things that we don't know enough about, but we will in time.
So I know you mentioned that one of the topics you'll be speaking about on the tour, but I know you'll also be offering some other lectures. And
yes.
Could you speak a little bit about the topics you plan to discuss?
I'm delighted to do that. First, if I'll give 3 or 4 talks. That's not decided yet, but let's say it's 4. So I'd like to start it with a background, so that as we move along, our fellow tourgoers, start learning from, or refresh their memories of what they know about the background of women in Cuba up until now. So I'll probably start with some overall talk, very light talk on how women have always played, or the role that women have played in Cuba's many efforts at independence culminated. But mostly I want to concentrate on the role of Cuban women in the revolution of 1959, in the Castro Revolution. I mean, among them, Vilma Espin, who was the wife now, this is, of Raúl Castro and the mother of Mariela Castro, who in her own right was a phenomenal figure during the revolution. And there are Celia Sanchez, who was probably Fidel's closest confidant and aide-de-camp up in the Sierra Maestra, and several other women who were really integral to the revolution. And then after that, I want to talk about another lecture will be then what happens next, what happened after the revolution. I mean, the revolution, one of the specific missions of the revolution that Fidel and others stated at the time was the improvement of women's status, the rights of women. And has that come to pass in the 60 years since the revolution? How have women advanced? Are the advancements real, or are they kind of window dressing? And I would like to talk about that. I will talk about that in my second talk. And then I want to talk about, including in the advances of post-revolution, I want to talk about the abortion issue, and women as entrepreneurs, and women artists. And the record is mixed in Cuba, particularly on the artist score and the dissident score. Some of the best-known women artists are opposed to the current government, and would still live there, and many are in exile, and that is also very interesting. So it's a mixed record, but very interesting because overall, if you go beyond artists, when it comes to health and education and business, you can see major improvements in women. And the third thing I want to talk about are the challenges ahead for women in Cuba, actually for all Cubans, and but for women specifically, since this is what our focus will be on this tour. I always leave my talks are very casual and open, and I always leave a lot of room for questions, and that's the most important thing, because we're all there to learn and to exchange ideas and to debate issues. And I think that's what makes the entire trip, it adds to the entire trip and to the wealth of knowledge that our fellow travelers will achieve, after spending 6, 7, 8 days in Cuba.
Thank you. I think those are all going to be incredible topics to hear you talk on.
Thank you, and I hope that many of you will join the trip in November. And I'll see you there.
Thank you to Luisita for sharing that insightful interview with us. I'm now going to go over some frequently asked questions we get about our tours. Firstly, is international airfare included? Prices do not include international airfare, and that's because we found that guests often prefer to use air miles to purchase their flights, and this allows them that flexibility. What are the physical requirements of the tour, and how much walking will there be? Well, we often recommend that you are able to walk for 3 hours unaided over uneven ground in order to do this tour. What documents will you need for travel? You will need to have a valid passport at the time of travel, and the tour operators will be able to assist you with getting all other necessary visas and travel documents that you would need for your tour. What should you pack? Before your departure, you will be given a detailed packing list that will ensure you have all the correct clothing and items for your tour. To recap this journey, the tour has one departure in November 2016 and one in March 2017. It is limited to 25 travelers and is an 8-day tour with the cost starting at $6,595. There is a single supplement of $850, and there is an internal air fee of $525. If you would like more information or would like to book, please call our call center at 855-698-7979, or you can visit our website to learn more about this itinerary.